Welcome to Boundless Plains to Share, a knowledge campaign brought to the world on behalf of Australia. In this interview, Mick Keogh, CEO of the Australian Farm Institute, speaks with Graham Phillipson. They discuss key domestic farm and agricultural issues such as productivity, the appreciation of our nation's farmers, the role of innovation, and Brand Australia. Some of these subjects pertain, at least indirectly, to Australia's export performance.
Mick, could you explain to us exactly what the Farm Institute does?
The Farm Institute's a research institute that focuses on policy issues. So we do studies into some of the policy, some of the economic issues that impact on the farm and the agriculture sector more generally in Australia, and look for ways to improve the outlook for the sector.
And what's the farmer's lot like in Australia? Has it improved in the last 10 years? Is it getting harder, easier?
It's a bit of both. The hard work, the isolation, the drudgery that used to be associated with farm work has largely disappeared. Telecommunications, transport and machinery and equipment have replaced a lot of that. It's probably changed the other way though in terms of the business of running a farm. So whereas perhaps 50 years ago or more, the farm sector was the creator of a lot of wealth and Australian agriculture didn't have much competition. Now we face a situation where there's a lot of competition. Countries like Brazil and even China that weren't even competing in markets 50 years ago are now major competitors. So running a business has got much tougher, even though the physical and the isolation has dramatically improved from what it was.
The Farm Institute put out a report last year saying that Australia's trade performance was, I think the quote was, pedestrian at best. Why aren't we doing as well as we should?
Well, I think there's probably three main reasons. One is we are a resource-limited country. We don't have huge areas of extra land, and we certainly don't have huge amounts of extra water to devote to production. So we can't really expand the area of farming or the volume of production easily. The second is that we've had probably a decade or more of relatively flat productivity growth in the agriculture sector. Now that means the units of output per unit of input hasn't been increasing. So that means we haven't been finding new and cheaper ways to do things. And that means the opposition, the other competitor nations around the world, have been catching up to us in terms of their production and their capacity. And I think the third thing is we really haven't thought about the fact that if those two factors are limiting, then the way to increase the value of production is in fact to lift the value of the products. So in other words, we're not producing just bulk, average, low quality commodities anymore. We have to start thinking about something that will appeal to a consumer who's got a few more dollars in their pocket.
And that's one of the issues we're looking at addressing in Boundless Plains to Share. It's really quality, not so much as quantity, that we should be going after, isn't it?
Yes. The old idea of value add used to be, well, we'll have a processing factory here, a wool scourer or a meatworks or whatever. Now it's increasingly apparent the value is in the information about the production system, about the way the animals were treated or the way the crop was grown, and the story, if you like, behind the production system. Because if you want to appeal to a wealthy consumer in China or India, then it's got to be more than just the quality of the product. The quality of the product has to be right, but then the extra bit is, well, what's the story behind this product? Why should I pay more for an Australian product compared to what I can buy locally?
Yeah,
if you haven't got that story.
Yeah, the story behind the product. You guys did a very good, in one of your farm journals, one of your publications, a recent edition looked at the idea of Brand Australia or branding Australian products, and there was a bit of difference between the essayists on whether this is possible or not, but they all seem to agree that the idea of getting a story or a narrative about the provenance of Australian agriculture and what makes it so unique and so good, that ties back to this idea of value add, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and yeah. I think that the debate about how much value that could bring to the agriculture sector sometimes gets a bit misguided, because it sort of sometimes reverts to, well, we'll stick a green kangaroo on everything and that way we'll be all better off, which isn't really branding at all. I mean, the last bit about branding is putting a logo on something. The fundamental bit is, what's the story? And we've got fantastic story to tell. We use some of the lowest levels of inputs of virtually any country. So in terms of artificial fertilisers and chemicals and all those sorts of things, our input systems are very low compared to most of our competitors. We can trace product better than most. Our logistics systems are very good getting fresh product. Because we're such a big country, we have to get fresh product to all corners of the country quite quickly to meet domestic consumer needs, so getting it overseas is really not much more of a struggle, so we're very good at that. We pay, and this is often overlooked, we pay very high levels of wages to workers working in the industry, so a lot of overseas countries are based on extremely cheap agricultural labour, whereas Australia has the original fair trade model, if you like, in terms of the level and skill of staff employed in the sector. So all those things together amount to a very strong, very positive story that actually resonates with consumers who are concerned about the environment, who are concerned about making sure people are treated fairly and the products that they're buying aren't doing any harm. But we have no story or no common storyline around that sort of stuff at the moment. We don't actually do that. We don't. I think we still feel we don't need to do that.
How do we tell that story? That's sort of what we're trying to do with Boundless Plains to Share. We're trying to tell that story. How do we tell it better? How do we get the message out there?
Well, I think there's a combination of things there, because you do need factual information, so we do have to start from a factual base, but then we have to also build the emotion into it as well. So I think it's a combination of dry economists and dry statisticians talking about the raw numbers, but then storytellers putting together a package of information about the nature of production, the environment, the way in which animals are treated and grow, all those sorts of things. And it is a very good story, but we never see that as a selling point. Yet, we see consumer demand in places like China absolutely skyrocketing for those sorts of products.
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do with Boundless Plains to Share. The idea of a campaign, a project that helps tell this story.
Yeah, and I think there will be. It would be ideal if we ever got to the point where everyone who ever left Australia trying to sell product had this same story in their pocket and understood that and could talk sensibly about that. And I think when we look at some of our competitors, the Kiwis, for example,
they've done a very good job.
Very good at that. That's what they've done. But we have agricultural traders leave Australia and spend most of their time criticising their fellow agricultural traders rather than talking up the value of their product, and I think that's where we fall down.
Is that partially because of our federal system with different, 7 different departments of agriculture?
I think so. I think there's a whole range of reasons that culturally we started off as 7 different colonies, and whether we like it or not, a lot of our laws, a lot of our systems are still state-based, and so I think that tends to disaggregate, and so we end up with trade delegations from Queensland going to China, and then the next day it's one from New South Wales, and the next day one from South Australia, and the poor old buyers in China have no idea where these places are. If we only ever got behind the story of Australia, I think we'd do much better.
Australia's recently been involved in a couple of free trade agreements. Are free trade agreements bilateral or multilateral enough, or should we be doing more in terms of either government initiatives or industry initiatives in terms of improving our export potential?
Well, I think the big challenge with all of those things is the free trade agreements were a great step forward. We've bashed our ears around multilateral trade agreements in the World Trade Organization for a long while and got nowhere. So the free trade agreements, particularly with the markets that we've negotiated them with, so Japan, Korea and China, are very, very important. But I think the most critical thing is they're not set and forget things. The rules can be modified, can be changed, conditions can shift. And so unless there's almost a constant vigilance on how those systems are working and the specific rules that need changing or modifying, you will slip back. And I think the other thing is that once your product is in that market, once consumers get a taste for your product, there's much less propensity for governments to then subsequently restrict it, because of course it's a political issue in the home market as well. So it's one of these things that once you get your foot in the door, you do have to keep working on it, but then it can tend to build on itself and become greater momentum and greater access to that market over time.
Finally, what's the one thing that Australia could do, the single thing that we should be doing more that we're not doing?
I hate to say it, but I think it's integrating our research and our production efforts. We've developed a research system here in Australia that is very good in agriculture, but the universities in particular, and particularly the larger universities, are becoming more and more remote from the industry.
Yeah.
And when we look internationally, when we look at Europe, when we look at North America, it's the integration of the manufacturing sector and the research sector that creates the real gains. And where we are, we seem to have them separated, and I don't think that's working to our advantage. So if we could somehow grab their heads and smash them together and get them to cooperate on a long-term basis, I think that would be where real gains would start to be made.
Well, let's try and do that. Mick Keogh, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you.